Well, we've been studying, starting last week, we were looking at Christ in us. Starting last week, we started looking at a short series on worldliness and its impact on us as we looked at First John 2, 15 through 17, the cravings of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Man, if you want to build a church, start preaching on stuff like that. I mean, people just love that stuff. It's just tough stuff. But today, as we look at worldliness and its seduction of the world to us and how it tries to pull us in through the media. We're going to be looking at Ephesians chapter 5, Ephesians 5, 1 through 14. Ephesians chapter 5, and I'm going to give you the whole context. That's the best way we should do that. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1. Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children. Live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself for us as a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. Verse 3, but among you there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people, nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a man as an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Verse 6, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. Verse 8, for you were once darkness, but now you are lights in the Lord. Live, that's a command, live as children of the light. For the fruit of the light consists of all goodness, righteousness, and truth. Verse 10, and find out what pleases the Lord. For it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible. For it is light that makes everything visible. For it is said, wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. As we look at the topic of the subject matter today is coram Deo, which is in the face or in the presence of God. And when we look at our consumption of media, I was thinking about, I'm doing some research on a typical day. Now, a typical day in Delta probably looks a little bit different than a typical day in Denver, which looks different than a typical day in New York, but in many ways they're not very different. They're very similar in our consumption of media. And basically, I thought a little bit about it. We wake up early in the morning to what? Usually some kind of alarm clock, either on our smartphone or our cell phone, or alarm clock, and the radio kicks on, and right off, media kicks in. Whatever's on the radio is playing. We start to get up and get ready. We usually have TVs or radios playing in the background as we shower and get ready for work. As the kids get ready, often I see teenagers on their smartphones consuming, in fact, getting on Facebook, MySpace, chat rooms, emails, connecting to their friends, find out what's the latest and the greatest that their friends have sent them or what's been posted on Pinterest, those kinds of things. As they're consuming their Cheerios, they're on Pinterest right off. Sometimes they're getting on their laptops, and then they move ahead. As you go off to school, how many times have you been behind a big vehicle, an SUV or a minivan that has two big screens in it? And the little kids, in their car seats are watching Disney shows. The older kids are watching whatever's their latest and greatest, right? And as you drive along, you hear the background of the radio in the car, or maybe you're actually surfing stuff. If you got one of those screens in your cars, you can do some of that too. And people shouldn't be doing that, but they do. Go off to work, same kind of thing, Kids are reading their favorite books like Paper Towns or American Sniper. I see that all the time. If they're lucky, they're reading a classic like Hamlet or The Scarlet Letter, but all those things are giving them a worldview of the culture. Mom, dad, involved with TV screens throughout the time of the day, getting on their emails, their blogs, their Facebook, their MySpace, all those kinds of things. And I looked it up. A typical day for a white-collar worker, 25% of his day or her day is lost in productivity because of surfing the internet. 1/4 of the typical white-collar's day is gone because of surfing the internet. Kind of stealing from their employers, right? Doing their personal emails, those kinds of things. Eventually, the hard work day's over. You go to pick up your kids. You stop off to pick them up, and your teenagers got the iPods on with their earbuds in. They're pumping Madonna or whatever else is the latest and greatest into their brains, right? and they're on their smartphones, and you are too. Your kids are back on the TV in the carpool line as you take them to soccer, that kind of thing, pick them up. Back to the house, everybody's broken down, worn out from the day. Let's grab some dinner and plop down in front of the TV and let's do it again, right? So that sounds a little crazy. And when they were surveyed, 96% of Americans said that they consumed radically less than what we just pictured. Now just think about the stat. 96% of us can't consume less than the rest of us. It's not possible. Okay, we all think that we consume less than we actually do. And the reality is we consume a lot. Then on the weekends, you come to church on Saturday or Sunday, Saturday evening, Sunday. You read your Bibles on your smartphones or your iPads during the sermon. You follow along with the worship songs on the screens. You watch a video on mission service. You do it at church too. And then you go on mission work to somewhere in Beijing, and you're sitting around with 8 to 10 million Chinese people, or Sao Paulo, Brazil, with another 32 million of them, and guess what? Everybody there is doing the exact same thing in their language. The world is consumed with media. We cannot get away from it. In fact, there's an entire group of people that research this as sociologists, and they've termed it, we live now in the media sphere. We now live in a media sphere where no matter where you go on the globe, with a few exceptions, the media encompasses you. One guy said it's just like this. It's like a bucket. You put your finger in a bucket, and when you pull it out, what happens? The water fills right back in. And if you move your finger to the other place and pull it out, the water fills back in. No matter where you go, you are consumed in the media sphere in the earth today. And he describes it as the media is omnipresent, a term used by God. No matter where you go, it's there. And that we got to be concerned about the content and the consequences and the culture that media is pushing out on us, that is seeking to influence us, to shape us, to kind of control us. And even in Little Delta, we have satellite TVs and cable TV and all the stuff just like everywhere else. It's just a big, big part of our lives. Then it gets a little bit worse, unfortunately. I looked it up. In one day in the United States, there are 68 million searches for pornography. 68 million searches. 1 in 3 downloads are related to that content material. And 1 in 2 men in the church struggle with that issue. Christians, people just like us. The real life is the media sphere has an influence on us, and it continues to push upon us. Advertisers spend $215 billion annually. That's half of the U.S. defense budget, which squashes everybody else's defense budget, on advertising. Why do they do that? Because it works. Because you and I buy Budweiser, we buy T-shirts and jeans and everything else, right? Because it works. And so it's all around us. What do we as Christians do to this? This is what one pastor said. Today, the all-pervasive glow of the TV set is the single most potent influencer and control factor in Western culture. TV has greater power over the lives of most Americans than the educational system, than the government, and most certainly than the church. Media has an impact on our lives. And last week we looked at it. When the culture comes after us, we define that the worldliness is anything in opposition to God that seeks to not glorify Him. So when you think about the media choices that you're a part of and what you see and what you hear, is it possible that those things are influencing us? Yes, it is. Appealing to the cravings of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life that we looked at last week. Ultimately, our worldview is on assault by the media all the time. Does that mean that we should not engage in the media? No. Quite the opposite. We should engage in media. Media is in itself a neutral thing. And how we engage it as Christians, which we're going to look at, is what the difference is. How we do it, how much we do it, and what we engage in, and how we look at that critically is what matters. We should not disengage from media. That's one of the things. People say we should disengage from media completely. Just quit doing it altogether. That is not realistic in this world. Nobody can really function that way. And it's not healthy. It's a form of legalism that says that we got to do a list of rules of do's and don'ts, and that gets us in the right standing with God. And that doesn't work. What gets us in the right standing with God is Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. Ultimately, We need to engage the culture. And we need to live in a kind of grace-based obedience to what God says about dealing with this. And that's where the term coram deo comes in. Coram diem is a Latin phrase which means before the face of God, in the presence of God. I think as believers, sometimes we forget that everything that we do in private, in public, and in our lives is right before the face of the Almighty. He is one day going to call us into account for what we do. He's very clear about that in multiple places. And if we live in the presence of God in all aspects of our lives, it helps us to understand a proper fear of God. Right? Proverbs says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs 1:7. So as we are trying to look at this text before us today, I hope that we can kind of tool ourselves with some ways to kind of deal with the media and how to make sure that we engage in the world but not be completely consumed by the world, okay? So first thing that we're going to look at in Ephesians 5. We need to watch what the media does, okay? We need to be careful to watch what the media does. But among you, verse 3, there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed. Now, if you look at other translations or you look in the Greek, greed is actually a translation in the NIV for covetousness. To desire something or someone that God has not chosen to give you. To be non-content. To want something that's out of the realm of what God's chosen to give you. Because these are improper for God's holy people. Not even a hint of sexual immorality. Not even a hint of impurity. Not even a hint of covetousness or greed. Why not even a hint among God's people? Because it says that we are God's holy people. That we are to be separated, to be set apart for Him and for His purposes in this world. To build His kingdom. To live in a different way. To live in a better way. We are to be His people, to be holy. Now, this is pretty clear that it's possible to do. How many of you have traveled abroad somewhere out of the United States? Probably many of you. Many people have traveled all over the globe. When you go to Brazil or you go to China or you go to Nigeria or something like that, you are a what citizen? A U.S. citizen, right? You're an American citizen. When you get there, do you stop being an American citizen? No, you're still an American citizen. You're in Nigeria. You're surrounded by Nigeria. You're immersed in its culture, but you still have the rights and the privileges granted to an American citizen that's usually enacted in some kind of treaty with them. Even though you're in a different place, you're still an American. You're still one of those people, and you don't stop being an American. When we're in the culture as Christians, we're still Christians. We engage it. We live with it, but we don't stop being believers. We engage it as believers and start living that way. I kind of wonder if our viewing habits would change if this verse was on a ticker at the bottom of our screens all the time. Not even a hint, right? I mean, if that was right in front of us, wouldn't that make it a little bit easier? You put in a war flick, and not even a hint. Oh, okay, Lord, maybe I shouldn't be watching that. Or halftime comes on at the great football game, and not even a hint. Oh, wait, I think that's a hint. I probably ought to fast forward through those commercials or their cheerleaders or those kinds of things, right? People say, but the objection is the watching isn't the doing. By watching, I'm not going to go out and cheat on my wife. I'm not going to kill somebody. I'm not going to steal from my employer. I'm not going to do these things. It's the sin that is in the act, right? Right? That's what people say. That's one of the great objections that we have. But we're commanded by God to make sure our minds are taking captive every thought to the obedience of Jesus Christ. 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5. We are to take captive every thought to the obedience of Jesus Christ. It's not about just what we do. It's about the thoughts and the attitudes that shape that, about what makes our behavior come out. We're being transformed into the likeness of Jesus by the renewing of our minds. Romans 12:2. And ultimately, the sin principle in those things in the world enact on us and kind of entice us. James 1:4 says, each of us entices when our sin kind of bubbles up and entices us and it drags us away. It's kind of like this idea of this animal pouncing on you and taking you captive. And when we allow these things into our minds, we become tempted with our own evil desire and we're dragged away and enticed. Kind of these things in the world fuel our sinful flesh principle. And they slowly but surely do what we saw in Demas last week, which is he was a powerful missionary with Paul, following God, but slowly and surely he drifted into the world until he got to a point that he deserted the Almighty. He loved the world, Paul said, more than God, and he fell out of God's plan. The passage doesn't say that we can engage these things and it's only sin if we act on it. In fact, later on in the passage, verse 12, it says, take no part in unfruitful works of darkness, but expose them. Expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. I think it's pretty simple for us to rule certain things out. You know, I don't preach against a particular thing, but some things we could probably rule out. Slasher, killer, horror movies, probably that doesn't fit within what we've looked at. A hint of these things probably doesn't fit within that. Pornography certainly doesn't fit within that. There's no way for those things really to fit into those things. Those are the easy things of evil that we rule out. But let's apply it to just simple things that we watch. What if we're watching something on the internet or on TV or on cable or whatever else, and there's an illicit relationship in that? Does this not reflect the world that we live in? Should we not expect art from the world to reflect themes of maturity that are in the world? Isn't that a normal thing that we should expect? We should. That's pretty normal. But how they reflect that and how we consume that is the issue, because the issue is really a heart issue, right? It's an issue of motivation. It's an issue of what we want to do to glorify God. And so these illicit acts, right? The shameful works of darkness, the answer is we can engage in those things, yes, but what if they're very explicit? What if they're very visual? What if they're discussed in words in great detail? And none of the consequences of the sin, none of those things are demonstrated or no biblical worldview. Then does it fit within the prism of not even a hint of sexual immorality or impurity or covetousness? Now suddenly we're in a different place because we see the very visual acts. We hear them described. And now through that prism, we have a problem because they act upon our flesh to tantalize, to incite, to allure us into a place that we should not be. We need to be wise in how we engage in the media, how it's depicted, and how we engage it, and how much we engage it, and the critical thinking that we use to engage it. Those are the big issues. It's a heart issue that we engage it in an intelligent and godly manner, right? Because ultimately those things that are done in secret, they should be in secret, right? They shouldn't be right out front in front of us. That's why they're put in secret, because they shouldn't be out there. They're immoral things. Here's another thing. During that time when you see some of those things come up, do you ever grab the remote, right? I think the remote control is not the bane of man. I think it's one of the greatest inventions of all time, okay? So we're watching a show. Everything's a good show. Suddenly a part comes up I don't want my family to see, and I can go right over that, okay? I can turn it off, or I can fast forward it with the hopper, those kinds of things. If you got a DVD, you can jump over it and then pick the story back up, right? It's one of the greatest inventions to man is the remote control, right? Just love it. That also works for my lazy boy, not having to get up and change the channels, those kinds of things. That works for me too. What about this? What about discussing with your family the things that you're viewing? Let's say you hop over those things, but still some of those mature themes are in there. You got your children, your spouse, friends there, whatever. What do we do to engage that? How do we engage that media where we have a discussion? My son and I have done this a number of times, or my daughter and I, where we watch a show that's got a powerful theme of something. Let's just choose something. A powerful theme like freedom in Braveheart. Freedom. But if you've seen Braveheart, it's got wicked, gratuitous violence. So how do you work through those things and still pull out the redeeming pieces? Well, depending upon the age and the maturity and what you do, maybe they can and cannot filter. Certain children cannot do those things. Certain adults cannot do those things. And if you have a certain temptation in an area, maybe you shouldn't view those things. You know what the Holy Spirit's laid upon your heart to work on it as a sin area. But if you do engage those things, why not have an intelligent decision, a discussion, where you're very proactive to discuss with your family the good themes that are coming out of that media and why these other things are junk and why we would not behave that way as believers and why it's bad and why it goes against God's law and the consequences of that evil and that sin. Then you have something that you can work with. Then you got something that you can use. We need to continually remember that basically we need to keep putting God's worldview of truth before us into our hearts and our minds through the scriptures, through these discussions, through prayer for each other, through prayer for our children. How many of you pray for your children or your grandchildren with their media consumption? You should. That God's Spirit will work in their hearts and their minds to bring the scriptures up to utilize with their media consumption. We don't want their minds to dull to the things of God, to the sensitivity that God's holiness has as a hatred for sin. That's where coram diem is, right? Before the face of God. We need to teach each other in these discussions to constantly think of ourselves as before the face of God, in the presence of God. Second, I want you to think about, you need to watch what the media says. Ephesians 5:4, right? It says, nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. Now we're moving from what people do in media to what they say, right? In today's culture, what I've noticed a lot is among the young, there's no tolerance whatsoever for any kind of cap on free speech. Go hang out at any college or any high school and try to say, you can't talk about that, you can't be a part of that, and watch what happens. Blow up in your face like a grenade. There's no tolerance in the young today for not having free speech. And that's okay, because in some ways, I understand their quarrel with moralistic approaches to holiness that kind of equate our maturity with lists of do's and don'ts without dealing with a heart issue. I get it. They're right about that. In the past, people have erred in that place, being moralistic, instead of dealing with their heart. So we should look at the motivation in the heart. But Scripture is also clear. Our words do matter. In Matthew 12:36, Jesus says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word that they speak. That applies to us and to each other in the church. It also applies to media and what is said there. You know, grace-motivated obedience, coram deo, being before the face of God, extends beyond our thoughts and our deeds to what we say. There should not be any obscenity, verse 5. No foolish talk, no coarse joking, right? Obscenity has to do with filthiness, lewdness, being off color in our speech and our jokes, vulgarity, perverted speech. You know, I went to watch my wife do the mozzarella. What was that, about a month ago, up in Snowmass? All these wonderful ladies, professionals, doctors, lawyers, all this stuff. It was amazing. These gals they're amazing. I just had a ball all day. Me and my daughter watching it. But we're sitting there at the first and the eighth kind of obstacle taking pictures. As they crawled underneath the wire and they're doing all this stuff, when they came out the other side, the speech that came out of those beautiful creatures' mouths, it was worse than any bar. And it was worse than any football team I've been on. Literally the F word all the time. And I don't have to fill in that blank for you. It was horrific. And I thought, these are people's wives, mothers, daughters, sisters, the women of our culture, the best and the brightest. But it's a normal part of life now in our culture so much that we need to put away that filthiness, that lewdness, that vulgarity, that perverted speech. And if you think the women are bad, listen to the men on a job site. Stuff you never repeat to your wife. Is it not true, men? Is it not true? And if you've been in the military, take that up another level. It's just horrible, right? But we as believers need to be different. Our words matter. Crude joking, perversion, jokes with sexual overtones, there's not to be part of what we do, right? That's foolish talk. And the book of Proverbs defines the fool as the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. He thinks there's no accounting for what he does. We don't want to be foolish. We want to be wise as believers as we process through that, right? We need to look and process what we're seeing and what we're taking in, Because when people speak that way, it's not a matter of do's and don'ts, it's a matter of reflecting their heart and their attitudes that come out of their speech, right? Jesus said what? Out of the abundance of the heart comes good things from the good man. But out of the abundance of the heart come evil things from the evil man. It's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean, Jesus said. It's what comes out of him, out of his heart. And it's reflected in your speech, first and foremost, right? James 3 says that if you never sin with your speech, you're a perfect person and you never sin at all. You're right in all your ways. That's because we falter in our speech so much. So when we're processing media, we need to be thinking about that. That when the word count goes up, like we just talked about, maybe we should get up and turn the channel. Maybe we should look at something different. I've told you in the past, I'm a big history of military history, big fan of it. Some of the accounts of soldiers are so raw, so vulgar, that I have quit reading the books. I've bought the books. I've started to read them. I've been very excited to hear about the battles and what went on. But the vulgarity level was so high in print or in the movie version that there was no way that I was going to get a redeeming value out of that. I had to abandon it altogether. Sometimes we need to vote with our feet. Christian movies we go to, vulgar movies we leave. It sends a very clear message to Hollywood of what we value and what we don't. So finally, verse 10, we need to think about how we consume the media in a proactive way. It says, verse 10, find out what pleases the Lord. Back to Coram Deo. If we are before the face of God, right now, we have an opportunity to change just a little bit today to maybe make our consumption, each of us in our own ways, a little bit better. So let's look at the four things I want you to think about just a little bit, okay? Think about using media selectively. Pick and choose what to consume and how much to consume. Be careful. Be thoughtful. You know, most of us consume media like breathing air. I don't think we think a lot about it. It's just all around us and we do it. We need to be a little bit more attentive and proactive, okay? Be selective. It is okay to choose things and to not choose things. That's what the Christian life's all about, right? Be selective. Okay, now listen to a couple of these questions. I'm going to give you a couple of questions. And there's a handout out on the Welcome Center that I put together for you. Different questions, time questions, heart questions, worldview content questions, okay? So just think about a couple of these. Am I seeking to escape from something that I should be facing by watching this instead? Am I using this media as a form of escape? It's a heart question. Do I secretly want to view something that has in it something that's sinful? Do I really want to watch this, not for the good content, but because there's something kind of not so great in there that I enjoy, that kind of tantalizes my flesh? Am I watching because I'm bored or lazy? My dad always had the radio on or the TV on in the background. Even when he was out working in the garden, the radio was on. When we were changing brakes, the radio was on. He always had it on. I said, Dad, why you have the radio on? You're not even listening to it. He said, well, sometimes I just get bored between things and it's something to do. Right? That's not a good reason to consume media just because we're bored. Am I watching simply because others are? This is the peer pressure factor. Okay? And there's copies of this out there. Just some things to think about. What worldview or philosophy of life does this program or this film present to me? Can I tell you what is the worldview in this what I'm viewing? It's an important thing to think about. Here's a very good one. What does this program or film glamorize? Because what it glorifies may do what? It may not glorify God. And our goal is to glorify God. And the world system's in opposition to that. So we got to watch what it glamorizes. You know, sometimes you watch a war movie and you walk away from it going, man, war's horrible. I hope we never have to engage that until the very last resort. And it doesn't glamorize war, it puts it down. It shows you the horrors of it. That's a good use of media. Sometimes, you watch them and they glamorize it, right? Those are kind of things that you need to be thinking a little bit about. What about some of these? Here's another one. Does the program or the film portray materialism as the good life, right? How about one for online? Do I communicate in a gracious, patient, and humble fashion when I'm on Facebook, MySpace, the internet, my emails? Do I use crude or arrogant speech? Do I puff myself up? Is my speech consistent with the gospel, or does it reflect worldliness? This is very real in the church too. The previous church I served at, there was a couple in a very large Sunday school class. That is, the Sunday school class had 65 people in it, okay? And this couple was co-teachers with another couple, and they got into a discussion and they disagreed. Fine, no problem. Believers can disagree, right? But outside the classroom, the one couple got on Facebook and attacked the entire class. And now, what you need to know is the Facebook was their Facebook for their class. They knew exactly what they were doing. They attacked the other teachers in the entire class. The next thing you know, me and another minister were intervening with 65 people that set up a meeting with us to, what are we going to deal with this couple? What are we going to do? Are we going to throw them out? Should we lynch them? Should we forgive them? I mean, it was a madhouse. So how we use those things, our online behavior does matter. It matters. So think about that. Selectively, proactively. What about accountability, right? You know, ask yourself some questions. Am I watching something that would embarrass my spouse? That would be an embarrassment to my children? That would be an embarrassment to my parents if they knew I was watching this? Or a friend, right? For our children, we need to consume media that they want sometimes before them. If you don't know the content of it, don't just throw your kids to the sharks, right? Don't do that. Sometimes you have to do some online reviews, right? For movies, Plugged In Online. How many of you ever use Plugged In Online by Focus on the Family? It's free and it's great, and you can look up almost any movie. Michael Medved does the same thing. There's reviewers, Christian reviewers of books also, that do the exact same thing. They're all free, and for just a few moments of your time, you can find out what's in 50 Shades of Grey or Paper Towns or whatever, and find out if that's something you want to consume or your children want to consume. Very useful. Very, very useful. Does anyone know what I watch and how much I watch, right? How much I watch. How much you watch has just as much of an influence on what you watch. That's a good question, right? When I watch something sinfully, do I confess it to other believers and ask for their help in overcoming my desire to return to that sin in the future? That's a great question. One of my fellow pastors had a problem that before he knew Christ, he was involved in pornography. So we set up a thing that every time he traveled, he had to travel for his job. This is going to be radical, so I'm telling you up front. But it worked for him. He's been clean now for 15 years. Been happily married for the same amount of time, raised 3 boys. But when he would travel to all these other sites, the hotel room that he'd book, removed the TV. Out. So the only way he took a hotel room is if they removed the TV from him. He had no way to access anything while he was there. And his laptop, his wife would go through as soon as he returned home. The entire viewing history. And that accountability helped him overcome a sin from fellow believers that now he has a hold on today. He helps other men in this area. It's a powerful thing. Find out what pleases the Lord and do that. Be accountable, be selective, be proactive, and finally be grateful, right? We're free to pursue all kinds of media to enjoy it as long as it's within what? Biblical parameters. As long as it's within biblical parameters, we can enjoy it and we should enjoy it. That's a good thing. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, and here's the command, think about such things, Philippians 4:8. Think about such things. So when you see a great movie that has a Christian worldview or good aspects of it that build you up, engage that. You should engage the media in that way. Same way with songs. Same way with internet stuff. You should engage it. You should have a part in it, right? So as we come to a close on this, I want you to think about a little bit. At the end of the game, our job is to find out what pleases the Lord, verse 10. Find out what pleases the Lord. When we engage our media, let's just be smart about it. Let's be intelligent about it. Let's be critical in our thinking. And you heard it here. This pastor did not say you should not engage in any form of media. You should engage in the different forms of media. Just do it in an intelligent way that's within biblical parameters with the right heart motivation to be obedient, to have grace-based obedience before the Lord, to kind of do the coram diem. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. What we take in matters. The old giggle, right? Garbage in, garbage out. It was true a long time ago. It's still true today. We just need to be smart that we keep ourselves from being polluted by the world through the media by how we intelligently engage in it. And just as importantly, how we train fellow believers and our children to engage in it. There's entire classes now on how to process media in college. That's something that should be beginning at the home with our children and our grandchildren. With a kid that we watch, the neighbor boy, with the kids that come over, helping them just natural questions. Find ways to work those things in and out of your media consumption to help children and young people learn, and other believers, maybe young believers, learn how to start processing those things, to be in the presence of God. You guys remember at the end, the simple little thing, be careful, little eyes, what you what? See. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above is looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Let's pray.